Bob Seger was born in Detroit, Michigan, on May 6, 1945, just days before the end of World War II. America was changing. The country was industrial, ambitious, raw, and in many ways, so was Bob. His father, Stuart Seger, worked for the Ford Motor Company as a medical technician and was also a musician, playing multiple instruments. He walked out on the family when Bob was 10 years old. That absence would echo in Seger's songwriting for decades, that aching sense of leaving, of loss, of trying to understand what makes people run and what makes others stay. Bob was raised by his mother in Ann Arbor. He grew up around the working-class grind and blue-collar dreams of Middle America. Radios were always on. Early on, Bob fell in love with Little Richard and James Brown. These weren't just artists, they were explosions of truth. Gritty, loud, wild, just like the streets he was raised on. His first musical attempts came during high school in the early 1960s. He played in garage bands, most notably the Decibels and the Town Criers, and started getting attention for his songwriting. But success didn't come fast. It would take more than a decade of persistence before America really heard his voice. In 1966, Seger released one of his first breakthrough regional singles, East Side Story. It was raw, loud, and full of Detroit angst, a punk record before punk had a name. Around this time, he formed a band called Bob Seger and the Last Herd. They were playing bars, college gyms, and roadhouses all across Michigan. One of the early records, Heavy Music, got national attention. It hit number 1 and 3 on Billboard's charts, not a smash, but a warning shot. Bob had the voice, the band had the sound, and Detroit had his back. That track, filled with wailing vocals and thumping bass, started to cement his style, soulful rock with Midwestern heart. In 1968, Seger signed to Capitol Records and released his first full-length album, Ramblin' Gamblin' Man. The title track became his first real national hit, charting at number 17. It was psychedelic and bluesy, the sound of a man caught between eras, riding the fence between the wild freedom of the 60s and the harder truths of adulthood. But despite that success, Seger's national career stalled. Through the early 70s, he released several albums that didn't chart well. Critics called him too raw, too old school, too regional. While acts like Led Zeppelin and the Eagles were rising fast, Seger was stuck in the middle, beloved in Michigan but nearly unknown elsewhere. Still, he didn't give up. He toured relentlessly, building a base city by city, bar by bar, college town by college town. He was a road warrior, and on those long nights, playing for 100 people or 1,000, Bob Seger found his voice. It wasn't the voice of stardom. It was the voice of steelworkers, waitresses, drifters, and the guys changing oil at the corner station. He didn't write songs to be cool. He wrote what people felt, but didn't know how to say. And soon, America would start listening. By the mid-1970s, Seger was done with chasing trends. He returned to what he knew best, rock and soul with a heartland core. In 1974, he officially formed the Silver Bullet Band, a group of Detroit musicians who shared his grit and loyalty. This was the group that would finally launch him into national stardom. Their first big album together was Beautiful Loser, 1975. It didn't explode on the charts right away, but it laid the foundation. Tracks like Kathmandu and the title song captured that same working-class spirit, worn but proud, flawed but full of life. Seger was writing about real people, blue jeans, long nights, and the weight of adulthood. But it was the live show where Seger truly came alive. Years of playing smoky bars and gymnasiums had made him a powerhouse performer. His voice didn't just sing, it tore through the air like gravel soaked in fire. So when Live Bullet dropped in 1976, recorded during a string of shows at Detroit's Cobo Hall, it was pure electricity. The album became a sensation, especially in the Midwest, where fans already knew Seger was the real deal. Turn the Page, with its haunting saxophone and road-weary lyrics, became a defining anthem of life on tour and of lonely souls in loud worlds. It wasn't just a concert album, it was a declaration. Bob Seger wasn't trying to break through anymore. He already had. Later that same year, Seger released the album that would forever cement his place in American rock, Night Moves. The title track was a masterpiece. Released in 1976, Night Moves wasn't just a hit, it was a generational memory, a nostalgic ballad about teenage lust and the slow ache of growing up. It captured something millions of Americans recognized in themselves. The way youth slips through your fingers, the way love leaves scars and sweetness, the way rock and roll becomes the soundtrack to all of it. Night Moves shot to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. The album went 6x platinum. And just like that, Bob Seger went from regional hero to national icon. But Seger wasn't chasing radio play or pop fame. While the music business in LA and New York became more polished and glossy, Seger stayed rooted in Detroit. He refused to move to California. He didn't party in Manhattan. He stayed in the heart of the Rust Belt and kept writing songs about real life. And America kept listening. Hits poured out over the next few years. Main Street, a quiet, heartbreaking ballad about longing from afar. Rock and Roll Never Forgets, a loud, proud anthem for aging dreamers. Hollywood Nights, a frantic rock ride through temptation and disillusionment. Still the same, about people who never grow and those who leave them behind. Every song had truth in it. Not the kind you read in magazines, the kind you feel at 2 a.m. in the back of a diner or while driving home from a job that doesn't love you back. By 1978, Seger released Stranger in Town, which included both old-time rock and roll and We've Got Tonight. The former would go on to become one of the most played jukebox songs in history, especially after Tom Cruise famously danced to it in Risky Business. And yet, Seger himself never considered it one of his favorite songs. It wasn't even written by him, though he reworked the lyrics. But it became a classic because it felt like Seger, honest, joyful, unfiltered. At last, Bob Seger was everywhere, on the radio, in stadiums, and on the walls of record stores. But even at the top, he never forgot where he came from. As the 1980s opened, Bob Seger released what would become his first and only #1 album on the Billboard 200, Against the Wind. It debuted in February 1980 and immediately shot to the top, knocking Pink Floyd's The Wall out of the #1 spot. That alone said something. In an age of theatrical rock and big ideas, Seger's grounded honesty still won hearts. The title track, Against the Wind, was reflective and melancholy. It spoke of time passing, of trying to stay true to yourself in a world that pushes back. It became an anthem for people growing older, not necessarily wiser, but still running, still trying. Other tracks like Fire Lake and Her Strut showcased his range, from country-inflected melodies to swaggering rock. But what stayed constant was the writing. Real stories, real emotion, wrapped in tight hooks and Seger's gritty delivery. Throughout the 80s, Seger continued to dominate. Albums like The Distance, 1982, Like a Rock, 1986, and The Fire Inside, 1991, all went platinum or multi-platinum. He wasn't chasing trends. He wasn't trying to fit into MTV's plastic world. He stayed true to the voice he found in the bars of Ann Arbor. Like a Rock, in particular, became a cultural fixture, thanks in large part to Chevrolet, who used it in their truck ads for over a decade. But the song wasn't written for commercials. It was written as a tribute to resilience, to holding steady even when everything around you shifts. It captured something timeless. And while some artists would have winced at being linked to a truck campaign, Seger took it as a compliment. He said, "Trucks are American. They last. I'm good with that." He wasn't flashy. He wasn't fashionable. But in a world chasing shiny things, Bob Seger was the rock. Even as his success soared, Seger kept his roots deep in Michigan. He wasn't a Hollywood guy. He didn't date starlets or throw wild parties in Malibu. He lived a quiet life, away from the noise, and that's exactly how his fans liked it. Throughout the 90s, Seger became more reclusive. After The Fire Inside in 1991, it took him nearly 5 years to release another album. It's a Mystery in 1995. The album was less commercially successful, but it didn't matter. His tours still sold out. His classics still filled the airwaves. And fans, now older with lives of their own, kept Seger as a soundtrack to memory. Unlike many of his peers, Seger didn't crash and burn. He didn't spiral out on drugs or scandal. He just slowed down. He spent time with his family. He became a father, raised his kids in peace, and lived in a quiet lakeside home in Orchard Lake Village, Michigan. But when he came back strong. In 2006, he released Face the Promise, his first studio album in over a decade. It debuted at number 4 on the Billboard 200 and showed that the voice still had power, the writing still had soul. Songs like Wait For Me and Real Mean Bottle didn't reinvent the wheel, but they reminded people why they fell in love with Bob in the first place. No pretense, no gloss, just truth and tone. In interviews during this period, Seger often talked about legacy, about how strange it felt to be recognized by multiple generations. When I started, he once said, I didn't think I'd still be doing this past 30. I thought rock was a young man's game, but it turns out it grows with you. The songs don't stop meaning something. They just mean more. By now, Seger had sold over 75 million records worldwide. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2004 and the Songwriters Hall of Fame in 2012. But perhaps most impressive of all, he had become one of the most consistently respected and beloved voices in American music. Not because of flash, but because of fidelity. To the work, to the fans, to himself. By the early 2010s, Bob Seger was in his late 60s, but you wouldn't have known it by the crowds. Every tour announcement sparked sellouts. Every night, thousands came to hear the same voice that had narrated their youth, their heartbreak, their hopes. In 2014, Seger released Ride Out, his first album of new material in 8 years. At 69, he was still writing, still pushing, still searching. The album featured a mix of originals and covers, including Steve Earle's The Devil's Right Hand and John Hyatt's Detroit Made, which became the album's lead single and a fan favorite. Critics praised the album's authenticity. It wasn't Bob trying to be young again. It was Bob being Bob, honest, rugged, and still proudly rooted in Detroit. The themes remained familiar: loss, aging, love, defiance, but the weight in his voice had deepened. I don't want to fake anything, Seger said in a rare interview around that time. I know who I am. I know what I sound like. And if people want to hear it, I'm grateful. If not, that's okay too. But they did want to hear it. The Ride Out tour stretched across 2014 and 2015. Night after night, Seger and the Silver Bullet Band tore through 2-hour sets with raw power. Songs like Roll Me Away, Turn the Page, and Night Moves brought out everything from tears to sing-alongs. For many fans, it was a chance to bring their kids or grandkids and say, this is the music that raised me. Seger wasn't just revisiting the past, he was honoring it. In 2018, Bob Seger made it official. The Roll Me Away tour would be his last. At 73 years old, he was ready to hang up the mic. Not because the passion was gone, but because his body was finally asking him to slow down. His touring days had started to wear. In 2017, he was forced to postpone part of his Runaway Train tour due to a ruptured disc in his neck that required surgery. Recovery took months. That was the moment he knew. He couldn't tour forever. The Roll Me Away tour ran from late 2018 through 2019, spanning more than 70 shows. It was a farewell to the stage and to the fans who had stood by him for over 5 decades. Every show was electric, emotional, and deeply personal. In his final concert, held in Philadelphia in 2019, Seger ended the night with "Rock and Roll Never Forgets." The lyrics, written decades earlier, now carried new weight. "So you're a little bit older and a lot less bolder than you used to be." But Bob, he was still bold enough to walk out with a roar, not a whisper. His voice had aged, sure, but that made it better. It cracked in places, rasped in others, but it felt. Every line was lived in. Every note was earned. It wasn't a performance. It was a confession, a celebration, a thank you. And the crowd gave it all back. In interviews leading up to the tour, Seger was clear. This was a true farewell. No fake retirements. No maybe one day comebacks. He wanted to step away with grace, still on top. He said, "I've given everything I've got on that stage. I've got nothing left to prove, and I'm okay with that." He returned home to Michigan, where he quietly slipped back into the life he always preferred. Away from the cameras, close to his family, and surrounded by the music he loved. Bob Seger didn't build his legacy on flash or controversy. He built it on truth. Truth in his voice, his lyrics, and his blue-collar soul. He never pretended to be larger than life. He was always just one of us, a man with a guitar, a story, and the guts to tell it. He gave voice to the heartland, to factory workers, single moms, Vietnam vets, and teenagers kissing in the back seats of parked cars. His songs were never meant to be perfect. They were meant to be real. Songs like Night Moves, Turn the Page, Main Street, and Against the Wind didn't just play on the radio. They sank into people's lives. Ask any Seger fan what his music means to them, and you won't hear talk of fame or charts. You'll hear memories, first dances, road trips, lost loves, long nights, long drives, longing. He was the soundtrack to the in-between, that place between youth and aging, between dreaming and settling, between leaving and staying. And that's why, even now, years after his final tour, Bob Seger still matters. Because rock and roll never forgets. He may never take the stage again, but the stages he stood on, they still echo. The radio still plays his voice, and people still roll down their windows and sing like hell when old-time rock and roll kicks in. He wasn't trying to be a rock star. He was just trying to tell the truth, and that made him a legend. If you've ever felt a little older, a little bolder, and still chasing what moves you, then Bob Seger's music was made for you. Thanks for watching Southern Sound, where the legends live on. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who still cranks the volume when Seger comes on.